Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the next in the series of the Culture Conversations. This one's a wellbeing special on building resilience in ourselves and our teams. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Geraghty, co-founder of Culture Consultancy. Okay, all right, let's get started. So, as I mentioned today, the topic is all around building resilience. How do we build that in ourselves and our teams? I'm very fortunate today to be joined by Dr. John Mervyn Smith, who's a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and co-creator of the Game Changer Index, as well as Farah Govani, who is an excellent mindfulness trainer and coach, and will give us some practical tips and tools to build resilience, and also lead us through a short mindfulness practice. So why resilience? I guess, as I'm sure you know, Culture Consultancy really focuses on both the human and the business side of work. And one of the things that we've been asked to do over the last few weeks is to run these kind of quick fire assessments on culture and employee experience, just to gauge kind of during lockdown how their employees are feeling. They want to understand what's their current state of well-being, to what extent are they feeling the pressure, what are they struggling with in particular, is there anything that the employer can do to help them? And there's a few themes that come up repeatedly, and we're going to cover these in various webinars, but one is, can we have better communication, not just from the top down, not just from the company outwards, but across the team, peers and colleagues? Can we have better comms? Can we have more direct contact with the manager? Everybody is firefighting at the moment, and there's a lot of this, hey, let's all get on a Zoom call together, let's have a group chat, but actually, where's that forum for asking those additional questions, or for having the one-to-ones, or the actually I'm not doing so well today conversations? The other thing that they want is the greater clarity on what's expected of them. If you were on the webinar a couple of weeks ago, you'd have heard me say that there needs to be a resetting of expectations. There's no way that you can expect employees to deliver what they would have delivered in a normal work environment during this situation with all the circumstances that are going on. But the last thing that comes out is really this kind of, how could my employer support me better to cope with this situation, to deal with the pressure that I'm feeling, to help me juggle the competing demands? So in effect, how could I build better personal resilience? I was saying earlier that you read a lot of these blogs that say how to cope with lockdown, and it says build resilience, but it doesn't really tell you how to do it. So I always think resilience is an interesting one, actually, because I don't believe that many people are really born with resilience. I think it's something you learn. It's something that you train yourself to do. You find healthy coping mechanisms. Although judging by the level of alcohol sales at the moment, I think some people have found unhealthy coping mechanisms, but that's another topic. Anyway, the fact that you can be trained in it should mean that it's accessible to everyone, yet at the same time, it seems like it's still a difficult thing for many people to achieve. Admittedly, these are pretty extreme circumstances that we're going to test our personal resilience in, but I feel that if people can really crack that now and learn how to manage it, then the personal challenges that we have in the future, or the next business transformation that your company goes through is going to be a walk in the park. Obviously, as I mentioned, when companies ask us to do this, there is also a business angle. It's not just that companies want their people to be happier and healthier. There's also the question of productivity, performance. More resilient employees are more likely to be able to perform under pressure, to not panic in difficult situations, to have greater perseverance, maintain a positive mindset, even when the going gets tough. So mostly today we're focusing on the mental resilience strategies, but it is also important to mention the physical, and we can cover that a bit more in the chat if you want, or we can do another webinar on it. But all the studies show that regular sort of moderate physical activity improves brain function, improves memory, learning, concentration. Science also proves that exercise has a positive effect on psychological well-being. Reduces anxiety, improves your mood, improves sleep, protects you against the harmful consequences of stress. And researchers say that those who participate in regular vigorous exercise are 25% less likely to develop depression or anxiety. And I don't know how you guys are doing with your physical activity during this time, but another thing that came up in our assessments was about people struggling to even get to the recommended 10,000 a day step count, you know, with some people just barely making 1,000. So obviously you appreciate it's, you know, it's difficult in confined spaces and juggling everything else. But I think if you can get yourselves and your people moving, that's already half the battle. But anyway, now we're going to move on to the mental resilience strategies. And I would like to hand over to our first speaker, who is Dr. John Mervyn Smith.
So, Joe, you've already got me thinking about whether we're born resilient or not. Maybe we'll come back to that conversation. But 10 minutes now on resilience, and in particular, internal dialogue. Joe's given you some sense of my background, and clearly as we look at this subject, I should be drawing heavily upon my experience as an academic and as a clinician. Now, I love this quote from Henry Ford. It captures, I think, a key principle of our thinking about resilience. If you think you can do a thing, or you think you can't do a thing, you're right. For me, that ties the link between how we think about the world and how we behave within it. So our assumption here is that thinking, feeling, behavior are linked. This assumption does underpin all of the talking therapies. So the way we see the world, our internal dialogue, if you like, will have a bearing upon how we feel about it, how we behave within it. Now, you may be convinced about that argument. If you're not, there's loads of science out there that demonstrates that link. Have a look at Martin Seligman's work, groundbreaking work in the areas of learned helplessness and perhaps more importantly, learned optimism. One particularly elegant study that he did using international swimmers at Berkeley. Just tell you briefly about it. Group of swimmers took a questionnaire. He put them into two groups of optimists and pessimists. One way of understanding internal dialogue, gave them a task: try and beat your personal best in the pool. They all got the same feedback. You failed by a fraction of a second to beat your personal best. Have another go in half an hour. What happens? You've already guessed it. Pessimists get in the pool and they swim slower. The optimists get in the pool and they swim faster. An elegant demonstration, if you like, of the way we think about the world and we think about our capabilities in it that has a direct bearing upon our performance. So if you're interested in this world, have a look at Martin Seligman's work. Now, internal dialogue, we also know from clinical experience and from the literature, is not a static thing. Joe's already picked up on that. It changes. We know it changes. We know that if we're knackered, it can mess with our minds. We know if we've had a glass of red too many, it will mess with our minds. But I want to look at three particular areas that we need to manage in order to manage our own internal dialogue and therefore our resilience: self-care skills, connectedness, and perceived resourcefulness. Now, self-care, lots of great messages coming out at the moment from all sorts of sources, as Joe was saying earlier, about the importance of self-care, because it does have the capacity, if we don't look after ourselves, to distort our perspective, and that's key. Two questions I will ask of you, amongst others, but two key questions. Do you have a daily self-care regimen that involves eating, sleeping, exercise, not drinking too much? Are you able to say no to others' requests of you? Key. On connectedness, the Martin Luther King quote captures this wonderfully for me. If you have nothing to die for, then you have nothing to live for. His point here simply, as we know now, and it's scary thinking of people who are isolated, but when people are isolated and cut off, there's a risk that their view of the world becomes distorted, that they lose perspective. And perspective is a key in this theme of resilience. Three questions I would ask. Do you have at least one person in your life that you can confide in? Do you have something or someone that you have to look after other than yourself? Do you find it easy to ask for help? There are other questions, but if you're saying yes to all of these, you've got some of the basics of resilience and robustness in place. Let's come back to perceived resourcefulness and the Henry Ford quote, because this is about perceived resourcefulness. I've been amazed down the years, the number of talented people I've talked to in formal settings, assessing for jobs and so on, and they underestimate their talents. They don't see their resourcefulness. They don't appreciate their transferable skills. It's really quite depressing as I think about it in some ways. So there's a lot we can do to recognise our own resourcefulness. One question I would have for you: does your current role take more energy than it gives? If it does, you're vulnerable, because that leads to a sense of feeling incompetent, lacking in resourcefulness, unable to have an impact upon your world. This is key. Roles that give you energy, roles that reinforce your competence will help you to feel resilient. So we know if we don't get these basics right, it can distort our perception of events. Self-care, connectedness, perceived resourcefulness, things to work on. Now, there's also the more entrenched internal dialogue that we need to manage. Interestingly enough, for those of you with teenagers, internal dialogue is often externalized. We hear 14-year-olds say, "Oh, I'm hopeless, nobody loves me, I don't have any friends anymore." And you can see that if they become entrenched over time, that's corrosive. It will undermine their sense of resilience and robustness. And as parents and as mentors, we can help teenagers say, is this true? Test it, challenge it. Interestingly enough, with adults, internal dialogue tends to go underground, tends to become entrenched, unconscious, fleeting, often cryptic. It takes a number of forms. I won't go through the details of all of these. We can possibly recognize some of them in ourselves. They're not always easy to spot. Probably the easiest are the shoulds and the shouldn'ts. When you listen out for someone who uses a lot of shoulds and shouldn'ts, what you're hearing is the potential for a mismatch between their expectations of the world and the reality. And that gap is a recipe for undermining resilience. So then in terms of managing internal dialogue, you need to surface it and you need to explore it. This comes back to the connectedness theme, with people that you trust. You don't need a psychotherapist to do this. A good trusting relationship can be the basis for helping you to think out loud. It's amazing that when we convert our internal dialogue into language out there, it takes on a very different form. It enables others to say, come on, is that true? Is that the reality? To give you feedback. Good friends don't collude with you. They offer an alternative perspective. They help you to learn, to adapt, and to grieve. And grieving is also key in this, because resilience, or a lack of resilience, is often around a fear of loss. So just to summarize all of this, I've galloped through these slides so that we have more time to discuss. But in terms of building resilience, the view is that the truth will set you free, but it may piss you off in the process. I should stop there.
That was amazing. Thank you, John. I think it's raised more questions in my mind, so it's going to make for a good discussion, I think. But excellent. So now we'll hand over to Farah Govani. For those of you who have just joined, Farah is a mindfulness trainer and coach who's going to talk us through some more sort of practical tips and guidance. Are you okay to share your slides? Yeah.
There we go. Thanks for having me, Joe. And it's lovely to be here, and also seeing some familiar names popping up in the audience, which is awesome. So I will be guiding us through a really short practice that takes about 2 minutes. I know you haven't necessarily signed up for a full-on mindfulness session, so I'll keep that one quite short. But before we do that, I wanted to share what mindfulness actually is, because unsurprisingly, not everything that gets written in the press about mindfulness is true, because who'd have thought that? So mindfulness is not about relaxing, which may be a surprise. Sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't, but it's not the purpose of it. Mindfulness is not about making the mind go blank, which is another expectation that people often have when they come to mindfulness. So it's not about relaxing. It's not about making the mind go blank. You don't have to hug trees. You don't have to chant. You don't have to wear white flowy clothes or anything like that. So, and as we go through, what I'm sharing can be for you, for your own resilience, for your own experience. And you can also be thinking about this if you're in HR or responsibility for teams and what have you, then all of this could apply for them too. But let's not forget about ourselves. So in terms of what mindfulness actually is, I like to describe it as a strategy, a process, and a set of outcomes. And in its simplest and purest form, mindfulness is a strategy to see the world clearly as it truly is, without any biases. So there's no positive thinking when it comes to being mindful. You know, positive thinking can well have its place, but really when we're being mindful, we're acknowledging the good, the bad, and the ugly. I may not like this situation, I may not want it, but here it is. Can I be with it as it is? So that's really the strategy. Now, the process of mindfulness, and if you've done any reading, then this could well be what you've come across. We can say that the process of being mindful is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, to the present moment, with kind curiosity and without harsh judgment. So there's quite a lot in there. So quickly unpacking that, there's intention. As adults, we are not mindful by accident on the whole. Little kids, completely mindful because their brains aren't full of thought and chatter yet. But as adults, there normally has to be this intention. And we're intending to pay attention to the present moment. So there's intention and attention, but those two together aren't enough. The crucial third point are the attitudes we bring. It's about the kindness, the curiosity, it's the non-judging. And going back to the should statements that John mentioned, should statements have a lot of judgment in them. So when we're being mindful, we're really inviting to let go of those harsh judgments. Now, it's not about becoming passive and letting things happen to you, and it's not about critiquing and not making change in your life, but it's doing it from the heart and with kindness rather than just kind of beating yourself up the whole time. And then we can also think about mindfulness as the set of outcomes that arise from seeing the world clearly as it truly is and paying attention on purpose to the present moment with kindness. Because there are so many outcomes and everybody is different, but we can summarize them really into, firstly, we observe our thoughts and emotions as impermanent. They do not last forever. The anger, the sadness, the grief, the happiness, the joy, they all end and move on and get replaced by something else at some point. Same with our thoughts. None of them last forever. And the more we practice mindfulness, the more we truly know that and we feel it. And that impermanence can, speaking personally, gives me much relief, like lockdown. This is not going to last forever. And then also what mindfulness helps us with is that we become less reactive. And I'm going to share some research in a moment that really talks to this. We become less reactive and we have space that helps us respond rather than react. So we basically make better choices. We make wiser decisions. Now you'll see in that whistle-stop tour of what mindfulness is, there's no mention of the word meditation. And often people believe that mindfulness and meditation are the same thing. Now, there are some people who can just wake up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to purposely pay attention to the present moment, be really kind about it. I'm not going to get attached to my thoughts and my emotions. I'm not going to take anything personally. This too shall pass. And I'm just going to be mindful all day. There are people out there that can do that. But for most of us, we need to practice it. And this is where the formal meditation comes in. The formal meditation gives us a safe practice time to practice seeing the world clearly as it truly is, to pay attention on purpose, to observe our thoughts and emotions as passing mental events rather than clinging to them. So we can think of meditation as being the scaffolding used to develop the state or skill of mindfulness. So it's not entirely essential if you go by the textbooks, but I'd say from my own personal practice and the thousands of people that I've introduced to mindfulness over the years, that it's pretty key for 99% of us. So I'd love to introduce us to a really short practice. And if you're interested, we can send out a longer 10-minute meditation to you after this. But yeah, I just thought, one, we probably don't have the time, and two, it may not be what you've signed up for today. So if you don't want to do this practice, that's absolutely fine. It's only going to be 2 minutes, so you can just let your mind wander for a bit, or so yeah, do whatever, and join us back and come back to the screen in 2 minutes time. For those of you that want to give this a go, it's called Notice 5 Things, and I've given you a slide here so you can see it, but you won't need it right now because I'll guide you through, but you'll have it there for future reference. And what this practice is all about is coming into our senses, because our senses, this body, is always here in the present. Right? We can't smell yesterday and we can't hear tomorrow. We can just sense this moment. It's only these minds of ours that have this ability to time travel. So if we want to purposefully pay attention to the present moment, a beautiful way to do that is to come into our senses. So I'm going to take us through a short practice that takes us through 3 of the senses: seeing, hearing, and touch. Now, if for you one of those senses is quite challenging or difficult, like seeing or hearing, whatever, then swap that out for smelling or taste. The thing about mindfulness is that it's really about practicing in a way that's right for you. And this is where self-care, if you were to ask any of my participants in my courses, that's about what I talk about. They just say, Farah, you talk about self-care all the time, because it's so important, even when we're not in a pandemic. So yeah, so I'm going to take us through seeing, hearing, and touch, but do swap them out if you choose. So the first thing with any mindfulness practice is setting the intention. Right? As I said, there's intention, attention, attitude. So the first thing is intention. So it's just saying to yourself, okay, now's the time to be present. And it's very helpful to slightly shift your posture to do that, sitting up a bit straighter or standing up, whatever's right for you. So just coming into a posture that feels wakeful. And then I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm not going to close my eyes. I tell a lie, because we're going to engage sight first. So we're going to set the intention to be present. And then we simply notice 5 things that we can see. And there's no need to go looking all over the place. Simply having your gaze directly ahead of you and listing silently in your head what you can see, 5 things. So it might be laptop screen, mug of water, book, whatever you can see. So just taking a moment and listing silently 5 things you can see. And you may find it doesn't take that long to notice 5 things you can see. So letting go of seeing, and now I'm going to close my eyes. So if you'd like to do that, please do. If you don't feel comfortable with that, that's absolutely fine. As we let go of seeing and connect to hearing and noticing 5 things that you can hear. So there might be sounds coming from your headset, i.e. my voice. Maybe there are other sounds in the room, or sounds outside the room, or sounds coming from your own body. So noticing 5 things you can hear. And maybe you've noticed 5 things you can hear, and maybe there aren't 5 things to hear. Maybe there's silence. So letting go of hearing, although sounds will continue to arrive at your ears, and coming into the sense of touch. And again, you may want to keep your eyes closed for this part. It might be easier, but totally up to you. And tuning into contact. What's the body touching? Noticing 5 things. Maybe feet on the floor, body on the chair. Perhaps noticing what your hands are touching right now. Maybe there are some things touching your face, hair, glasses, headphones. And when you've noticed 5 things that the body is touching, tuning in to how you're feeling right now. Seeing if you can acknowledge the truth of the present moment, seeing the world as it clearly is. You may not like it, you may not want it. But this moment is like this. And opening your eyes when you're ready, if they're closed, coming back to the screen. So I just want to briefly share a few bits of research and then some resources, and then we can move into the chat. And I'm sharing some research about the impact of 10 to 15 minutes of daily mindfulness practice. So I'm not talking about extended 45-minute sessions or anything like that. If this is something that appeals to you and you're quite research driven, then maybe this is the motivation to give this a go. Or if your employees are very data driven and research driven, then maybe this is the kind of thing that they'd find helpful. And I've picked 3 studies that feel really relevant to lockdown. And the first is that married couples were asked to meditate together every day for 15 minutes and then talk about their experiences. Doing this for 5 weeks led to a reduction in marital distress and an increase in happiness. Second study. Participants were asked to meditate every day for 15 minutes for 3 weeks. They were then invited into the lab and put through a series of exercises that were designed to provoke anger. I love this. It culminated in them giving a 2-minute presentation about something that was important to them. But all of them were given the feedback: your speech was boring, you sounded like you hadn't given much thought at all to your future goals, what a waste of my time listening to you. Participants could then retaliate by giving hot chili sauce to the person who provided the feedback. And what they found was that those that had been meditating for 15 minutes every day for 3 weeks gave less hot sauce to the people that provided feedback compared to the non-meditators, which indicated, let's say, a desire to cause less pain. They were better able to control their emotions, to regulate their emotions. And finally, people who meditated every day for 10 minutes for just 2 weeks had less signs of compulsive internet use than the control group. So relationships, emotion regulation, and compulsive internet use. I'm sure, or it could be compulsive chocolate eating, or it could be compulsive smoking, or drinking, or compulsive anything. I thought these could well be quite relevant during this time of lockdown. So I just want to share a few resources, and we can send these out to save you from frantically jotting them down, or I guess you could take a screenshot. I mean, there's a ton out there, but these are the books, the videos, apps and so on that I use that I really recommend, but we can send those out. And I want to share this quote, which was one of the first mindfulness phrases I ever read back in 2006 when I started meditating, practicing. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So with that, I'll hand back to Jo.
Thank you, Farah. That was also fantastic. Excellent. Wow. Don't know if we've got enough time to get through the questions here. I think the people can have, but that was brilliant. Amazing. Before we go deep into the chat, I just wanted to pick up on Nick Price's comment in the chat about people not wanting to speak up, which is actually a very valid point. Everyone's seen that, but that kind of the tendency for, you know, for people to ask, or for managers to say, you know, how are you? How, you know, how's everything going? And everyone's just going, yeah, I'm fine. For whatever reason, you know, either they don't want to use up the airspace or the time on that, or they don't want it to be seen as a sign of weakness, or yeah, potentially they're worried about losing their jobs, etc. One of the things that we've seen really work is the kind of, I never usually like the word vulnerable in the business space, although I know it's very trendy, but if you start the conversation with, actually, wow, God, this is tough, isn't it? You know, these are the problems that I've been facing. It's really difficult. I can see people are struggling. Then people are so much more likely to open up and go, oh yeah, me too. You know, once somebody's put it out there. Before the call, I was telling the story about the parents' WhatsApp group last night where, you know, we're clearly all struggling. And it just took one person to say, you know, oh my goodness, I've had the most amount of meltdowns this week, you know, tears, tantrums, everything. And then that's it, it exploded. There were kind of 50 messages of everyone going, oh yeah, me too. So somehow just kind of putting it out there as a first off, if you're in that position, can open up the conversation. But anyway, I will not take up any more of the airspace. Who's got a question for our lovely speakers? Here we go, Carolina. What tips could you give to help someone having those negative thoughts? Who wants to take that first? Farah, is that one for you? Or?
Yeah, I can start with that for sure. Yeah, negative thoughts. We can't plan for them. They creep up on us, or they are shouting loudly. With negative thoughts, we can choose to engage with them, or we can choose to not engage with them. And typically what we've been taught to do is to engage with the problem, identify the gap between where we are and where we want to be, and track our progress along the way to get there. I mean, I used to be a project manager and a change manager. You know, that was, people paid me to do that. You know, we're here, we want to get there. How do we do it? So if we're building pyramids, changing our org culture, or tying our shoelaces, that's a really good approach. When it comes to our thoughts and our emotions, that kind of gap analysis isn't so helpful. So the more we listen to those negative thoughts, and I'll take, you know, some examples of mine. Farah, you're a mindfulness teacher. Why are you eating so much chocolate? Surely you can handle it better than this, type thing. You know, we can either listen to it, but I know that just makes me feel more miserable, or we can go, okay, and disengage from it. Sounds very simple to do. It's a lot, sounds simple, quite hard to do, but that's where our practice can come in. That the more we formally meditate and watch our thoughts pass by like clouds in the sky, which is a very common metaphor, without clinging to them, the more able we are to disengage from the thoughts, let them float by. They might sting a bit as they pass, but that little sting is a lot easier than the full-on onslaught they can stab us with if we engage with them. So it's practice.
Thank you. And then I thought I'd go back to John. You asked a lot of questions in your presentation, and I think we got some answers to some of them, but I think it's really interesting. So some people have said that they do have a daily self-care regimen. Nobody's mentioned yet on the, are you able to say no to others' requests of you? How do people feel about that? A strong crowd. I think it's tricky. I think it's tricky when people are in that position as well, when again they feel like they're the more junior person in, you know, in a relationship or in an organization, that it's that kind of, okay, yes, I'll do whatever's on.
It can almost feel provocative, that suggestion about saying no, but I think for me it's at the heart of people being able to protect themselves at the very least, which is about self-care for me. Can you say no? Now, I guess there are ways of saying no, and there's a skill set around how you say no to people in order to protect yourself. But if you don't feel you can, as we all know, it leaves you feeling very vulnerable. And not saying no often reflects internal dialogues around, oh, I can't be rude to people, I can't cause offence. It's amazing what we all do to avoid causing offence that puts us in harm's way. So it's a core self-care skill to be able to say, no, that's not quite where I am at the minute, I don't want to do that, or do you mind if we put that on hold and I can pick it up next week, or whatever it may be. But it's a key skill.
Yeah, and I think there's a piece here which is interesting. I think, you know, if you feel like you're really in a strong position, or a stronger position than other people are at the moment, it's harder to say no to people that you think are in need. And I keep saying to myself, the oxygen mask, you know, put your oxygen mask on first, kind of thing, because when you're in a great position, you'll be of help to other people. But it is quite tough. I don't know if you've got any sort of recommendations on that sort of, you know, how do you help the other person? You know?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I would track that into what are we saying to ourselves about putting someone else's needs before our own. And does it make sense to do that? And, you know, these are internal dialogues that happen very early on in life. You're sitting around the supper table, and I sort of grew up being told that you should never take the last sandwich on the plate. So you need to think of other people before you think of yourself. Now, that may be right in some situations, it may not be, but unless you're conscious of that, unless you're aware that that's what you're saying to yourself, you can't even begin to question it. It just becomes habitual and potentially undermining.
Yeah. And then there was another question earlier that someone raised before, I think it was you, Esma, about how we train our minds to become human being as opposed to human doing, the art of being still. Do you feel that that's been answered, or would you like to put that to one of the speakers? Esma? I might unmute everybody, actually. So, Esma,
hello, yes. So yeah, sorry, I was on mute, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so my question was really around, there's a lot of action that we are involved in our day-to-day life. So how to really be still, how to train our mind to be still and just to absorb things and be in the present, like you said. So how can we train our mind?
With training, with ongoing practice, with the 10 minutes a day, the 15 minutes a day, or every other day, whatever feels manageable. And part of the training is setting the intention about what you're paying attention to. So if you think of building your mindfulness muscle, the more you practice it, the more you lift your mindfulness weights, the better, the stronger your mindfulness becomes. So it could be that you choose to just focus on your breath for 10 minutes every day, and that's the recording that we'll send out to you afterwards. The more you do that, and each time, because in 10 minutes your mind is going to wander, I'm going to say a gazillion times because that's a nice technical number. It's going to wander a lot. And the practice is when your mind has wandered away during a practice, it's bringing it back that builds the you know, the wandering away doesn't do anything, but intentionally bringing your attention back builds your muscle of awareness, of attention. So often people meditate and think, oh, my mind wandered all the time, I'm rubbish at this, I can't do this, everyone else is meditating but it's not for me. That's one of those negative critical thoughts that we can just let go of, because minds wander, it's just what they do. So the more we set the intention to train our attention in that way, when we're not meditating, the more likely it is we can focus and pay attention and be with whatever it is that's going on.
Excellent. Another question that I was going to pick up, I think in the connectedness, because this is something else that we've seen come out a lot, John, about the questions, you know, do you have someone in whom you can confide? I think hopefully most people do, but do you have to care for someone or something other than yourself? And actually, a lot of the sort of survey results that we've seen, the audit results, have been especially people living on their own, younger people living on their own, possibly don't have a pet, don't know their neighbours. What can you do in this situation? I mean, what if you don't have anybody else to care for or anything else to care for?
I mean, this draws as much from my psychotherapy work as anything else. But one of the themes I've noticed, and it does tie in, so bear with me a second. The risk when people are feeling fragile or less than resilient is that they go inward, they become absorbed with themselves, and that just exacerbates that sense of fragility. And I've often found that it's just so helpful having something, this sounds obvious now, having something, someone to care about that takes you out of yourself, even if it's just having a goldfish and making sure it gets fed twice a day, but it shifts your attention to something other than you. There's something about being self-absorbed, I think, that potentially undermines our resilience, and it necessarily distorts our perspective. I think Farah and I are very much on the same ground, where a common theme here is about our perspective of the world and how that gets distorted, and just trying to get a grasp on reality so that distortion doesn't undermine us.
Yeah, excellent. And there's some good points in the chat. Nick, you're doing some meditation in the office. That's good. And I think the piece about, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what you think, Farah, about remembering somewhere or focusing on somewhere that made you feel quiet or still. I have my School of Life 15-minute timer here that I use, but I'd be interested to hear what other people are doing, or any tips, Farah.
Yes, it can be useful to have reminders. Oh, like having the timer in front of you. Oh yeah, now's the I said I was going to meditate every day. Here's a actual timer to flip over, and off I go. I know there are other types of visualizations and so on where you can imagine you're on a beach or in your safe space or your sanctuary or whatever. I don't know much about that kind of meditation, so I don't want to say much about them. I know some people find them very helpful, but it's not a mindfulness practice because it's taking you away from where you are. I'm not saying they're wrong or bad, I just don't know about them.
Okay. And then Hayley, did you have a question? Did you want to ask a question to John? Are you unmuted?
Was it something about disintegration, Hayley?
Yeah. Feel free to pull your slides back up again, John, if that's easier.
No, yeah, I mean, in my world, there seems to be this compulsion to put categories around things, and that's happened with internal dialogue, like the shoulds and shouldn'ts we were talking about earlier. But one of the common ones is that sort of catastrophic thinking that's underpinned by a deep down fear of disintegration, that the world is going to fall apart. So, example, chatting to one of my colleagues on Monday, virtually, obviously, and there's the usual, how was your weekend? How did things go? And she said, oh, I just broke down yesterday and I had to have a blub. And what's interesting with her is she's the one that we all look to hold things together, and that's her expectations of life. That's her internal dialogue. I must hold things together. If I don't, the world will fall apart. So she has a blub and actually realizes that the world doesn't fall apart, that you move on to the next thing. So in a way, you'd like to think that those conversations with colleagues are quite helpful in that sense of recalibrating our expectations of ourselves and what's going to happen in the world at a time when there's a lot of catastrophic talk about, just a lot of it, which seeps into our unconscious in a way that just ain't healthy. So it's challenging that. It's challenging that disintegration thinking. Hayley, I hope that answers a bit of the question.
Yeah, says yes. And then there was one from earlier as well that was about focus, and I don't know if we've covered that, but there's a lot of background noise. There's a lot of disruption. There's a lot of kind of, you know, physically things going on and mentally things going on. Any more tips on really kind of focusing our mind on what needs to be done?
I mean, yeah, there are some practical things, because my standard answer is probably quite obvious now. Meditate for 10-15 minutes every day and practice paying attention to just one thing at a time. But more broadly than that, you know, little things like turning off your email notifications or your Facebook notifications or whatever notifications can be so helpful. Even, you know, yeah, just turn them all off, because chances are you're looking at your phone enough that you'll see anything new that's coming through, right? So that you don't have to be told every time your favorite person tweets or whatever. A really second simple thing is, like, on my door right now, I've got "please do not interrupt me unless the house is on fire" sign. And when that's, you know, my husband does not seem to respect a closed door on itself. That doesn't seem to work, but that sign is enough to go, okay, she really means it. So it's just like managing whoever you're with right now. I mean, this is specific to lockdown, I guess, but yeah, managing whoever you're with right now to say, look, this one you really can't come in, even if do I want some lunch or something really sweet, you know. So it's just managing some of those distractions. If you've got young kids around, maybe that's harder, but yeah, working with what you've got.
Can I build on that? Because I love your email story, and I think what I would encourage you to do is, when you do switch off your email and you feel that tinge of anxiety, stay with that anxiety for a moment and try and understand what you're saying to yourself that generates that anxiety. Is it that you suddenly fear that you're not indispensable anymore, or that you fear that something's going to fall between the cracks because you haven't? Whatever it is, I like that, because those new actions that generate anxiety give you an opportunity for self-awareness, that you can say, this is true. Is the world really going to fall apart? Will the sun come up tomorrow? Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of approach.
Yeah, very good. Any more questions? I was thinking about the optimism piece. I'm trying to find the slide now that had that on there, but the optimism, the connectedness, and the perceived resourcefulness. But how do you get optimistic if you're not optimistic? How do you become more optimistic?
Yeah, it's seriously, if you haven't come across Martin Seligman's work, get on Amazon, get his books. Some great work on learned helplessness as depression, breakthrough, because it helps us to think about depression in a completely different and practical way, and his book on learned optimism. Now, what's amusing about Seligman's book on learned optimism is he's obviously a pessimist and he's struggling with it as he's writing it. And I think the message, Joe, is the same, really. So if pessimists say to themselves, oh, I can't do this, I'm no good at that, or whatever, it's simply a reflection of the things that we say to ourselves. Now, if I say to myself, oh, I can't, I'm useless at the guitar, I've been trying to learn it for years and I'm useless, actually that's true. I'm not saying convert that into a positive statement that says I'm going to be like Eric Clapton next week or at the end of lockdown. Look, if it's true, which is Farah's point. Live with it, grieve for it, stick it in the case and stick it in the attic and move on. But until you challenge your own thinking about your expectations of you, that's a struggle. I mean, there's a lovely book by Julian Barnes called The Sense of an Ending. And, within it, there's this constant theme that our lives are a story we tell ourselves. Sometimes that story is helpful, sometimes it gets in the way. But if we don't raise it to consciousness in a way we can challenge it, it can haunt us.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think on optimism, we can beat ourselves up over it a lot. We put it in the same bucket as positive thinking, and I should be, like something that I've noticed myself a lot, because I would never class myself as an optimist ever. But some thoughts I've noticed recently is like, why am I feeling down and grumpy? My close family are healthy. We live in a nice house. We've got a garden. We've got a woods. We've got access to outside space. You know, think about all those people that don't have that. I've got no right to be having a down day or down hour, whatever. It's like, Farah, get over yourself. This is difficult. This is suffering in some degree. This is stressful. That's okay. I think we always have to, there's an expectation that we always have to be up and on and with it.
Yeah.
And I was looking out at the trees. We live on the edge of these beautiful woods, and I've been watching the trees as spring does its thing, and all these bare trees are now green and covered and so on. I thought, we allow trees the whole of winter off.
Yeah.
And even a lot of autumn. We don't think they're rubbish trees anymore. We don't think they're good for nothing. We just let them have a bit of downtime. And for us, we don't even let ourselves have 8 hours of sleep as downtime sometimes. We should just give ourselves a break.
That's brilliant. Just to add to that, I mean, I think we are right about beating ourselves up, but you've also prompted another thought in my mind. I think I've experienced sort of 3 or 4 decades probably where we've become frightened of depression. And yet most people, unless they're severely clinically depressed, depression will lift. People will come through it. And actually the realization is for people who do have those dips is that it will lift, and people naturally come out of it. Now that makes me think that depression serves a positive purpose. It allows us to be indulgent. It allows us to eat too much chocolate. It allows us to slobber around on the sofa. It serves a purpose. So I don't know why in the Western world we're so terrified of depression. It's a natural part of life. It will come and it will go. And sometimes you just, I think that's your point, Farah, isn't it? Sometimes you just have to let that happen.
Yeah, you know, sadness is a key emotion. We've got to allow it, especially during these uncertain times, right? I mean, I feel a whole roller coaster of emotions. Even within, say, one day, I can feel valued, I can feel unheard, I can feel full of love and joy, and then I can feel full of rage. I can think my husband's the best person in the world ever, and then 10 minutes later he's driving me crazy. And just allowing it, going, okay, this moment's like this. I mean, yeah, if we're clear, I mean, I've had depression in the past, and I've had some amazing therapists, and I've had my time on Prozac, and I'm grateful that all those things exist. But a lot of the time, it's a sadness. And to John's point, I think we don't allow sadness, and that makes me feel sad. Actually, that's such a shame. Sadness is there for a reason, to help us grieve whatever it is, to signify loss. And
Right. Yeah, spot on.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I think there's one topic we could quickly run through. Maybe if anyone's got any suggestions. Nick said, well, what are people doing to keep their teams engaged during this time? We've obviously got some ideas from clients and bits and pieces. Nicola said, we've got survey results that over 80% appreciate these smaller informal events that we've been doing, plus Wellbeing Wednesday. We've definitely seen, and it depends on your demographic, right? It depends who your people are, what age they are, what kind of business you're in, but definitely the sort of regular sort of formal catch up, but also the informal, and that might look like for you Friday night quiz, Friday night, beers. I've got a really good article on how to run a very good pub quiz virtually, if anybody wants that. There's lots of tech tools. Gamifying anything seems to work really well. So whether you use the tech tools or not, gamifying exercise, even if it's literally how many steps did you manage today, but some kind of, if your people are into cycling or running, or there's the 26 challenge, isn't there, going on at the moment? I don't know who's running. Was it the British Heart Foundation? I can't remember who's running that, but because the London Marathon isn't on, there's a challenge to say, what can you do, even if it's 2.6, is it a walk, is it a run, is it something else? But gamifying it just seems to make it fly. That slight competitive edge is really good. I know some people have had sort of music nights, bring along your best vinyl, probably not, but bring along your favourite songs. That's just in my world, I think. But bring along your favourite songs to play at our kind of virtual, disco, but not quite, but singing. That's quite good. What does Claire say? Fitbit challenges, yes, they work really well if everybody's on those. What's that one, Piers? I don't know that. Seed buyer. I'll have a look at that. But guide for virtual meetings. If anybody wants, I'll send the link round for that later as well. Anything else that people are doing that they think works or they've seen other people doing that's really good? I do think it's important, the informal, and I'll tell you something that managers struggle with is actually making it not about work. So I've seen a lot of, right, we're going to have this really informal get together and just chit chat like we would do in the tea room or, you know, around the water cooler. And then halfway through the conversation or through the Zoom chat, they go, oh, so-and-so, have you done that piece of work? And that may well happen in real life in the tea room, but I think, you know, under these circumstances, it's kind of precious time where, again, especially I know lots of people who are really on their own. You know, I had one person that was gate crashing other people's conference calls because they had nobody to talk to. I mean, that's quite a sad state of affairs, but, you know, that give them that opportunity, let them have that time to just, even if you're desperate to say, where's that piece of work, you know, just let them have the time that's chit chat and not about anything in particular.
I think even just calling it out and saying, we know that this is hard, we know that we might be feeling disconnected, and just I found that you know, other clients have said just by acknowledging it, you know, seeing the world as it truly is and not hiding from it, leads to more engagement and feeling valued, going, oh yeah, you're right, this isn't the way I'm feeling isn't wrong.
Exactly. And I like the sort of being able to trust, you know, trust people to deliver. But again, there's been a lot of that kind of, right, I expect my team to be up at 8 o'clock, you know, on a conference call, dressed for work, look the part. And I can't think of many businesses where that's really essential. So there, you know, if there can be some perks of this time, could it not be that? That's my daughter's reading over Zoom lesson at 11.
Oh.
So. That it should be to allow people a bit of flexibility and a bit of trust and empowerment, I think, to get on with that. But
just a quick observation, Joe, there may be some gender differences here. There's a suggestion that women are better when it comes to just sitting around, sorry, I don't mean just sitting around talking, and are comfortable in that setting. Most chaps, by all accounts, need to have conversations over a task. Doesn't matter what the task is, but the task becomes a vehicle for having conversations. So it could be anything or anything, but it almost legitimizes the sorts of conversations women might have without the task, if that makes sense.
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. Just going to wrap up now. Thank you to my amazing speakers. That was fantastic, really interesting. If people would like to have the slides or the links or other things that were shared, Farah's 10-minute meditation, let me know. More than happy to send all of that. Next week is on building a culture of innovation with Derek Bishop and Chris Beswick. And the week after is on internal comms, helping people thrive through powerful internal comms. So thank you again for turning up. Lovely to see everybody, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.